And welcome to this, our third installment of the chat, a series of community conversations on subjects of concern to the people in New Bedford. I'm Andy Tomalonis, a writer and managing editor for the New Bedford Light. And tonight we'll talk about the city's escalating rental costs, which are leaving many in New Bedford residents unable to afford quality housing. We'll be joined by four experts because the host is Jack Spillane, who has written extensively on this subject matter. But I'll turn the conversation over to Jack and he can introduce the guests.
All right, thanks for that, Andy. I'm really excited about this version of the chat. Everybody knows that housing prices have just escalated greatly in New Bedford the last couple of years. Just this week, I had a friend who was advertising a downtown apartment in downtown New Bedford for $2,000 a month, an unheard of amount in the city years ago. So we're about to spend $82 million in ARPA monies, American Relief Project Act, and the city is deciding how they're going to spend that. And we have three experts that have some ideas on how to spend it. Josh Amaral is the Assistant Executive Director of the nonprofit community action agency PACE. He is one of the managers of its housing initiatives. Amaral is a former three-term member of the New Bedford School Committee. He is the chair of the New Bedford Homeless Services Provider Network. Renee Ledbetter is the president of United Interfaith Action of Southeastern Massachusetts. She is the vice president of the NAAC New Bedford branch and is the director of the New Bedford Shannon Youth Violence Prevention Program. Renee has worked on housing and other issues with UIA through Our Lady of Assumption Church since 2002. The Rev David Lima is the executive minister and former president of the Interchurch Council of Greater New Bedford. He and his wife Joanne are the co-pastors of New Seasons Worship Center in East Freetown. David is the immediate past chair of the New Bedford Homeless Services Providers Network and a member of its executive board. So welcome to everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So my first question is, and I'll throw this out to all three of you, and whoever wants to can go first. Talk about the reasons that you think the largest portions of the city's pandemic relief funds should go to affordable housing this year. David?
This is where we're all trying to be polite, Jack, you know, and I'd say, why doesn't Renee go first?
That's nice.
Okay, so, well, the reason why the largest portion should go to housing is because right now, because of the pandemic and other reasons, we're in a housing crisis. We have hundreds of people that have been evicted, probably over 300 since, I think, January, I'm not sure, of this year. And in order for our city to move forward, we have to make sure that we have stable housing for our residents. There are so many things that fall into the housing crisis, as far as education is affected, violence, the opioid crisis, everything. Housing is the center of a lot of issues that are happening in our community, and we need to make that a priority.
So there's been some talk that maybe arts and tourism, which is what the mayor's highest original priority was, should be a little higher. Some councilors want to devote it to water and sewer. Why should it be housing, Josh?
I think, Renee outlined some reasons why housing is such an important topic in the community and such a priority. At PACE, every 3 years, we do a community needs assessment and try to see where the areas of top need are. And the 2017 one or 2018 version found that housing was the top need. We did it again last year and found that the housing challenges became even worse. You have nearly half the households in the city can't afford their housing costs, and nearly a quarter of them spend more than 50% of their income on their rent. So, we all love to live here. We appreciate the arts and culture sector. And so it's not so much that the two need to be pitted against each other, but I think it's important to look at where they overlap. So the hospitality sector, the waitresses and cooks and people that work at all the places that we go downtown to have a good time can't afford their rent every day. And I'm sure it's the same for, the perception of the quote unquote starving artist has never been made more true than when rents are $2,000 or $1,700 or $1,500, especially when they've gone from being half that to where they are today in a very short period of time. So I think we love to see the city getting better. We love the arts and culture and being a hub for the history of New Bedford and all that comes with it. But I think we also have to be realistic that we need some strategies to make sure that this is a livable place and an affordable place to live for all the people that we rely on to deliver these enjoyable parts of our community.
David?
And I think that's the important thing, as both Renee and Josh are pointing out. And let's face it, the extra money's coming in is exciting to hear. And trying to divide it up in a way that benefits the whole city is obviously, take the wisdom of Solomon. And let's face it, if $82 million sounds like a lot of money, and it is, but if you threw it all into housing, you're not going to solve the housing problem. So I think it's about being strategic. I think also the biggest part that I think concerns many of us is making sure that it's a priority. Arts and culture is definitely, I was at the Zeitarian the other day. I know they want to, it's earmarked in this for at least $1 million or $2 million. And that's wonderful. But as I was walking to the Zeitarian to see the Ray Charles show, I walked past a few people that were huddled in a storefront to sleep for the night, So it's wonderful that we're able to bring in business and attract people to our restaurants, but they get to see our homeless in different places. And that's because we're not necessarily doing everything we can. And for some, it is an overwhelming choice. And some folks need more assistance. But we don't have enough resources. We don't have enough shelter beds. With the shelter beds, we have a tunnel effect that's pinching because we don't have affordable apartments, so that when somebody goes into shelter and starts getting on their feet so that they can go into their own apartment, they can't afford their own apartment. There aren't affordable apartments going on right now. PACE does an incredible job keeping a record of what's available out there. And when you're seeing studio apartments going for $1,100 or one bedroom apartments going for $1,200 or $1,400, you got to have a great paying job. And so it's usually being filled by somebody that's coming from somewhere else. And the workforce that we have, like Josh alluded to, our wait staffs, our people that are doing not the high-end jobs, but just blue collar entry positions. They're having to work 2-3 jobs and 2 or 3 people in the household trying to pay for those things. And that's been exacerbated, as Renee said, with COVID and the evictions and with the train coming. There's speculation going on, and so all of that's happening.
Renee, I was reading that a typical person struggling with their rent is a single mother with one child working full time. Someone working full time, is that a population we're used to not being able to find an apartment she can afford?
No, it's not. And I think that homelessness and housing instability and insecurities doesn't look like it used to. So the average person that may not meet the low income guidelines, the average person that may be working, like you said, with one child or even 2 parents that make above the low income level, they're struggling. And so we're going to see a lot more people looking for housing. They don't even have the ability to save money to purchase a home because even the prices of the homes are outrageous. So it's the people that are struggling are not just the low income. It's the families that are working. And I'm not saying that the low income are not working, but I'm just saying it's the families that are above that federal and state income guideline that are struggling as well. Like myself, like everyone's just one paycheck away almost from being homeless. And I myself work and I have a good job, but it's not enough. When you have rent that you're paying, and plus utilities and all these other expenses that come with it, I'm paying almost over 50% of my income level. So, and there are quite a few families that are paying over 50% or over 30% of their income level. And we need to take a hard look at that and see, are we pushing families out to go buy homes in North Carolina, to go live in other states in order for them to afford to live? Is that what we're doing? Everything else is important that they have the money earmarked for, but we don't want to lose residents as well and have family suffering. That creates a lot of mental health issues. It creates a lot of other issues, like I stated before, dealing with violence, dealing with education. We have over 1,300 kids in the school system that are homeless right now. How does that affect them? How do they become productive citizens if they don't have a system that they can rely on to make sure that their families are stable?
Renee, your group, United Interfaith Action, has proposed $10 million for new construction. How do you envision that working? Would it be nonprofit groups that come in and bid for a project? How would that work? How did you arrive at 10 million?
I don't think it was any specific antidote. We were just looking at what can be done. It could be nonprofits, it could be development companies that are willing to make sure that 40% of the housing costs are affordable, and another percentage is affordable for those two family incomes, even though they have two incomes. I think we envision it by the inclusionary zoning, where we have a lot of abandoned storefronts. We have a lot of abandoned places that can be rehabbed as well. So that money can go towards that. You could have organizations that, like PACE, for example, instead of giving them $1 million, give them a few million. They can do a lot of damage with that. They can make a lot of changes. They can change people's lives with that money. You take organizations like that and let them create what needs to happen, because it's not only a place to live, but it's a place for them to grow, and being able to have the resources at their fingertips, whether it's through rehabbing old houses or inclusionary zoning by building on top of storefronts and creating a neighborhood that thrives.
Josh, PACE has a project that you were, or an idea, I think is a better way of describing it, for a real estate trust that you described to me. You and Peter Muse and David and some other people active in housing in the community have been talking about it. I know it's been done before. Tell me a little bit about how a real estate trust would work and how that would be a good use of the money.
Sure. The brief explanation of the concept is that some of the multifamily houses in the city that are being sold and bought up very rapidly by investors, speculators, as Reverend Lima mentioned earlier, who are coming in from out of town. They're buying these houses up. They're evicting many of the tenants from the houses who are paying rents that are a little bit old, right? They're paying $800 and $900, and rather than raising their rent, doubling their rent, they just sort of clear the building out. They renovate it. They get the house in good condition, and then they go to rent it out for $1,500 a month and bring in new tenants. A lot of the tenants come from out of town themselves, or they're people like Renee mentioned that are just priced out of buying their own home. So they instead settle for like a premium apartment. The problem is all the apartments are becoming premium apartments, and there's not enough left for the working people in the city. So what PACE would propose to do is get into the game of buying up some of these properties, and with the ability to offset the purchase price with some grants and some other kind of flexible financing options, we could continue to rent them at sort of $8,000, $9,000, $1,000 a month, and make that affordable to people. I would say our strategy is not necessarily scoring the touchdown. It's playing red zone defense. It's keeping the houses affordable, but the bigger picture affordability in the community is probably 2,000 units that are new and developed into the community. So our strategy is a piece of that, and we'd like to do 50 units. We'd like to do 100 units. We'd like to make a dent in that and preserve those units for the people that we represent, and make sure that there's stable housing in the city. But I think the picture goes beyond us. So we see ourselves as one piece of a larger strategy that we hope to advocate for.
So explain just how you would be able to afford to have people buying properties that they could then rent for $800, $900, $800 or $900, $1,000. How could they afford to do that?
Sure. So these investors that are buying the properties up now, right? Some of them have a lot of cash to bring to the table, but a lot of them have to make sure that they're getting $1,500 a month in rent because they're paying the debt that they borrowed to buy the house at $500,000 to begin with. As PACE would propose to do it, we would hope to generate some funds either through the ARPA money that's available that we're talking about tonight. There's another program called the HOME program, which passes federal money to the cities to assist with this sort of thing. And because of our status as a community housing development organization and our track record in the community, we think we could attract some of those grant funds and use those dollars to sort of offset the purchase price. So while a triple decker might be going for $400,000 or $450,000, half of that could be picked up by a grant, and the other half of it we would take out a mortgage. But the rental revenue, even at $800 a month, would more than pay the note every month on that property. So that's how we could see that working. And it would also uplift neighborhoods and sort of revitalize neighborhoods and have that impact, because we'd still fix it up and take care of it in a way that some of the slumlords that New Bedford has become notorious for haven't.
Yeah. So I want to make sure I understand how this would work. So you have this grant money coming in from different sources, and then you would give that to the first-time home buyer to help them with their down payment. And that would be enough money so they could then rent the two other units in the 3-family for a affordable price. Am I understanding it correctly?
I mean, that's a model that would work, Jack, but I think what we're proposing is that we would be the buyer. We would be the buyer, we would be the landlord, and we would make that work. And over time, the rental revenue would allow for potentially the purchase of additional properties, in addition to keeping those nice. And unlike a lot of the triple deckers in our community that are sort of bland, they get rid of some of the historical features. They're not really kept up well. They don't have the neighborhood character in mind. We could change that a little bit, and I think that would have a positive impact on the community, in addition to preserving some affordable units while our city economy sort of transitions, because I think the impact of the Boston economy coming to the South Coast has been noted, but the incomes of many of the people that live and work here haven't really caught up. So the big money from out of town is coming in, and that's impacting us, but we haven't had a chance yet to get connected to their economy. So I think we have to have a strategy that phases that in over time. And one way to do it is to preserve housing. The other way to do it is to develop additional housing, but that's a longer and more expensive game.
Okay, so this is a little different than the first-time home buyer programs that we've seen before, which is also part of the mayor's proposal. David, I want to ask you about, there was one feature, I think UIA proposed it, but I know you've talked about it over the years, is a central location for homeless housing. UIA has proposed $5 million. How would this central location for homeless housing work? Would it be single rooms? I know it's been talked about in Boston to solve the mass and cast problem. How would this central location for homeless housing work?
Well, again, I think, and we've got to be careful that we don't confuse folks that are watching tonight. There's the sheltering for people who are homeless that can't afford an apartment, can't afford anything right now, and trying to get them into a place where they can become stable, get some case management working with them, and being able to do that. And shelters like the Sister Rose and Grace House and Killian's House in our city do a decent job, but we don't have enough beds for what we have. And I know one of the fears, in fact, one of the questions that I'm seeing that's being asked is, if you build these things, more people will show up, more homeless will come. If you build affordable and low income, and that's one of the things that could possibly happen. But the truth is, we have these folks here in this city. We already have homeless here in this city. And it's being able to take care of our own in the first place. So, like right now, we have a warm day today. So cold weather sheltering isn't happening. But tomorrow we're going to have into the 20s. We're going to be putting up people. And because of the COVID situation and all that, the overflow is going into a motel. And we're paying big money to do that. If we were to have a shelter like a Father Bill's, someplace that was bigger, but had a plan. So you take the folks that are out there on the street, keep them safe, get them some counseling, get them connected to services. Sometimes it takes time because you got to build that relationship with folks, build their trust. Because some people, a lot of the folks that are out there, they're hurting. They may have a substance use disorder. They may have an alcohol problem. They may have mental health issues. That's what a lot of folks have. But you also have, is we were talking earlier this week, a mother and a daughter. Mother's in her 80s, the daughter's in her 60s. They got evicted from their home and they're living in their car. We don't have any place to go if you even know that they're out there. If there was some place where we had, and could bring more people in, then you're able to start setting them up to help succeed, get them into a place of stability. And the fact of the matter is, every city has some issues. But New Bedford is not alone. I've done some traveling, all of us have done some traveling, and you'll see tents right on the sidewalk in some of the big cities like LA for blocks. Mass and cast, like you said, in Boston, you had hundreds of people. You have to come up with an idea. You can't just ignore it because it doesn't just go away on its own. And that's, again, back to what we were saying, you got to be able to set some priorities. And I think that's the biggest concern that I have seen with the discussion over the ARPA funds is what's going to be done and how is it going to be done? Because if you're only working to help people, first-time home buyers, that's great, but you're not helping any of the other folks that are in dire situations. And it's not about just low income. It's about affordable workforce housing. The people, you got a lot of folks working in a lot of mills still in this city. We don't have the mills that we used to have, but you still got a lot of people in mills in this city. And their pay is not able to afford the $15, $16, $100 apartments and take care of their food and their utilities and everything else. That's the struggle that we're starting to see even heightened right now.
Renee, the UIA's plan also had this proposal for a centralized location for homeless. Do you have any thoughts on that? How it would work?
I think Reverend Lima said it best, exactly what he said, having a place during the day where people can go and get set up with services, maybe even having some extra beds, some beds there available. But even if a homeless person is to get sick, they going to the hospital just creates a hardship for them as well. So even if they, like somebody had a cold or a flu, there would be a place there for them to rest until the shelter beds were available at night, especially on cold days. But basically to get the services and maybe clinical services and, maybe they could have different representatives from different organizations because we have tons of resources in the city. We just have to make sure that we're utilizing and hitting the right ones for the needs of the people that are hurting right now. So I think Reverend Lima covered all bases. Great job.
Elise Raposa has written in with a question about how do we, the out-of-town landlords, the role they play, how can we encourage owner occupancy? I think, Josh, you spoke to that a little bit before. You have other ideas on how we can solve this problem of out-of-town speculators coming in? They buy up properties and sometimes they don't really maintain them that well. I've seen situations where they're even charging top dollars with a building that isn't maintained that well. How do we address this problem of the out-of-town landlords?
Yeah, it's a complicated one, and I appreciate the question from Elise and you're bringing it up, Jack. I think it requires multiple approaches, and the biggest fear I have with the out-of-town landlords is when the housing market eventually dips. Those landlords are the first ones to scram and leave abandoned properties in their wake and all kinds of chaos behind. We saw it a little over a decade ago, and we'll probably see it again at some point, because the amount of money they're putting out to buy some of these properties and be competitive in the market is crazy. That said, the only way to combat that problem is to embrace the free market, right? And to compete for those properties, whether that's a nonprofit like us, or whether that's encouraging local buyers of some kind to get into the game and buy those properties, preferably as owner-occupied properties, as first-time home buyer type programs. But we need more in the game, because right now we have buyers that are coming in from Boston and New York and New Jersey and wherever else, and they're paying cash for $500,000 properties that 10 years ago would have sold for $250,000. And that's got a huge impact in raising the rents, and it doesn't really seem healthy or sustainable. It certainly isn't for the population that we serve, and it requires a multitude of strategies, from first-time home buyers to encouraging people to own and occupy these houses, but it requires money.
Yeah, I would say not a week goes by that I don't get an offer from somebody to pay cash for my house. It's a very, small little house, and somebody is trying to buy it. I've never seen that kind of thing in New Bedford before. What is it about?
I think people are waking up, right? I mean, we're from here. We think it's a special city. We love our coastal community and the historic charm of downtown and all the different neighborhoods and all the different cultures that are part of the city. And right now there are a lot of people, particularly young professionals from Boston, who are priced out of that market because it's just totally extreme. You can't even buy a single family house or an apartment for a family to live in Greater Boston without spending $1 million or more. So then you go, well, could we grin and bear the commute for a couple of years and wait for this train to come, and then get connected that way? I know I have a friend in Cambridge who just bought a house in Greater Boston for almost $1 million, and I regularly say, hey, why don't you consider New Bedford, right? Like you could buy a bigger, better house here for half the price there, and it'd still be like twice as valuable as my house and as the average house in the community. And so what? You're working remotely anyway for the most part, right? So you can really get through it. And I think that's a factor to consider as well, is the commute is less of a challenge getting to Boston because more people are working at home. So people are maybe a little bit quicker to pull the trigger on buying a house here and figuring it out later.
David, another of the ideas that's being kicked around is, I think you mentioned it, a day center for the homeless. We know that the shelters usually require their guests to leave during the day. That can be a problem in the very cold weather, but it can be a problem any time of year because people are loitering in the downtown. Some of them descend upon the bus station or the library. Tell us about this idea for a day center.
Well, being able to have a central location that has, number one, something that will attract folks, because let's face it, one of the biggest reasons why people hang around, whether it's the bus terminal or other areas, is socialization. Humans need other humans. We need to be around people. And if you're homeless, sometimes you need it because of safety's sake. Sometimes you need it because you just don't, you come home to your spouse, you come home to your kids, your parents. But when you're homeless, who are you coming home to? And so being able to have a place of safety where people can get resources, where people can get rest, where people can get connected to healthcare. Because again, that's one of the issues that does take place is, how does somebody stay healthy when they're in these kind of conditions? To your point with the cold weather or the hot weather. I mean, there have been times where we've gotten cases of water and ice and things, and we've taken that out to encampments around the city when we've had these stretches of heat or humidity or hurricane storms, things, heavy storms that have come through the area. It's not just the cold weather to keep people safe. And so being able to have a place, again, whether it's one or a couple, during COVID, they have not necessarily had to leave the facilities, the normal shelters, the Sister Rose and all. because, especially during the cold weather, because keeping folks safe. The state did loosen up that regulation. But after COVID, which I pray happens any day now, we might go back to that again. Once you just keep dispersing folks, unless you're able to capture them where they're with you, then you're not able to help change them. People end up losing hope. That's one of the biggest issues. And when you lose hope, then it's like nobody cares, the shame and the stigma. That's why you end up with a lot of difficulties that happen on the streets and people that just get hurt. And then if you have addictions or anything else, then it's like that overwhelms you and you can't get the help you need.
There's been some talk about using the Packer building up at the end of Route 18 for this. Is that a possible site?
There, whether it's Packer or another place, Packer has been a site that has been discussed many times. Carl Alves and his team of people already do a lot. There's already a lot of folks that go there for assistance. It is a place that is well-known, centrally located. But again, it's something that's going to need a lot of support to just put it together. And there's a variety of things that can be done, but that again goes back to how do we use the funds, and whether it's this as a priority or something else like the trust that Joshua's discussing. It's about being able to sit down and actually create something planned. We've got to be able to just more than just discuss about what we'd like. We've got to sit down, figure out what we need, and then pledge some money to it. And I think too many times what we hear is lip service. We're going to do another study. Let's do another study, folks. Let's do a study and see what we need. Well, I'm going to tell you, the homelessness issue has been studied to death in this city. Okay, the Homeless Service Providers Network has to do reports for HUD every year. Intense, half-inch thick reports. You know, Josh is part of that reporting because work that he does with PACE and so many of the others. So it's one of the things that we need to be able to do more than just study. We need to sit down and come up with some concrete plans.
But by the way, anybody who wants to join in on any topic, I'm trying to spread these topics around, but anybody who wants to join any topics, just join in. I'll keep my mouth shut. Andy, anytime alone, do you have your hand up to ask a question?
Video again, come on. I'm interested in this, and David, you're talking about Reverend Lima speaking about the people who have gone, they are homeless and you're trying to find them homes. How close are people who can't find a home, can't find a rental unit? How close is that, how do you prevent people like that from falling into homelessness? There's sometimes, it's just wondering one mistake, one missed rental payment. I mean, how does that happen? How close is the average person who can't afford a home, can't afford rental? How close are they to, needing services?
Well, you did mention my name, so I will say this, and then I'm going to quickly give it to our other panelists because they're right on the ground level with this too. The fact of the matter is, whether you are living paycheck to paycheck, which in this city is probably most of the people, okay? I'm willing to bet you got over 50% living paycheck to paycheck or month to month, okay? So all it takes is a month or two's worth of difficulties, and they're facing difficulty. Facing evictions or other difficulty. And then you've got the folks that are in a place where they're getting some assistance and they get work. And this is probably the thing that bothers me the most about our federal government and about state and local. People get assisted living, okay? Low-income housing, things like that. Everybody gets upset. You can't build more low-income housing. We already have too much. And, truthfully, this percentage of what New Bedford has compared to surrounding towns, we do have more than our share, but we also have more need. We're a city. But if you're in low-income housing and you get a job and you start to better yourself, all you're paying is 30% of your income until you reach a certain level of income, which for most of us would still be considered low. But as soon as you reach that, then you no longer qualify for assistance. But once you no longer qualify for assistance, you can't afford the rent that you now have to pay fully. And that's called the cliff effect. And you fall off. So most people make a decision to stay in low-income housing rather than us being able to assist them and do it to scale, help people as they continue to get better.
I want to move on to a couple other topics because I've got a lot to cover here. Renee, emergency relief for renters is a $5 million item in the UAIA proposal. How have renters been doing with the pandemic relief money that has been available for them? And is that an ongoing problem? We hear that, yes, people have gone back to work, but they're so far in debt from the year or two that they didn't pay rent that they can't catch up. Talk about emergency rental assistance and what's needed.
Right. So 5 million is a drop in a bucket. That's nothing. That's not a whole lot of money to be able to help with the services, but it's something, right? So we have to start somewhere. And there are other funding opportunities like the community block development grant or the Community Preservation Act. I mean, there's other pots of money that you can get into, but the emergency assistance is definitely needed. I know UIA has had a fund, a COVID relief fund that they were able to help assist a lot of families, but we only could limit it to a certain amount of money if we wanted to assist. If we had $10,000 and we gave, 4 people, back rent, that's all we would be able to help. So we tried to be equitable with the money that we had. I just put that number out there. It's not an exact number, but we have to try to do what we can to help those that, like Reverend Lima stated, that are struggling. And I can say as a witness to someone that lived in housing, had to move out because you can't afford it anymore. And you have to find an apartment that you could afford, but it's hard. It's hardly anything out there. So the emergency rental assistance is definitely needed in our city for those people that are one paycheck away from being thrown out of their home.
Josh, is Pace seeing a lot of people still struggling with needing emergency rental assistance?
Yeah, the demands are still there. I mean, Renee talked about 5 million. I think we've probably put out over 5 million in rental assistance between us and our partners, and the needs still exist. I think that the funding has become a little bit more scarce, and so have the requirements to get it, right? There were points in time during the pandemic that I think the resources were being allocated, to people who needed them quickly, and that was the way that it should work. And now it's becoming a little bit more of a process to access and prove the need as it should be. So we still see those needs there, and I think the key, the previous discussion there was what happens with how do people become homeless, right? I think Andy mentioned that, and this is purely related to it, because there are cases where we can't help someone with the financial assistance to move into a new unit because they can't find the unit. So there are a lot of people in New Bedford, and we hear this story almost every day, that were paying $800 to rent an apartment in a family member's house or a friend's house or a good neighbor, or they lived there for a long time and nobody ever raised the rent because they were a good tenant. And now that house is being sold and that person has to go and find a new place. But when they go to apartments.com, which I pulled up on my computer, the best we can find is $1,200 for a 2-bedroom on Division Street, $1,200 on Bolton Street, $1,250 on Austin Street, and it keeps going up and up from there. And so they can't afford the $400 or $500 extra a month. Who could, right? So we'd love to help them with first, last, and security, or a month or two of back rent if we could keep them in the unit. but the reality is they can't close that gap. And then you've got this lengthy waiting list for a subsidy to move into a house with a voucher. But even the people who are granted the voucher, they might wait on this waiting list for 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, and then they get a call one day and they say, hey, you've waited your turn, you're finally granted a voucher. All you got to do is go and find an apartment. And then there are no landlords that will take them these days because the private market is paying a little bit more and there's a little bit less regulation. So then those people keep searching, and they strike out. And eventually they lose the voucher and they go all the way back down to the bottom of the list, and they got to wait another 7 years for a crack at it again. Absolutely crazy. And we can do better than that for people. I think it's an economic issue. It impacts all businesses, including ours, where we have staff that make minimum wage or just above minimum wage, kind of on the cusp of a living wage. It's a racial justice issue as well. So we all talk about that, but housing is probably the most impactful part of it, especially in the city, because the people struggling with rent are not on Hawthorne Street. They're in other neighborhoods in the city, and it's easy to forget about them or drive by them on your way to the store. But these are people who are struggling every month, and those are the people who are paying more than 50% of their income in housing costs, and those are the people who need us to help them.
So just to raise your hands, do we need a line item in the ARPA money for emergency rental assistance? I wonder if you can raise your hand if you think we do, not if you don't.
I'll say, Jack, my hand is conditional. It depends on if the state continues to fund RAFT and some of the other emergency programs. So there have been times in this where our position has been, we don't need more money. There's plenty to go around right now, but we're kind of getting to the end of that now. So I'm a little worried that if the legislature doesn't act or use some state ARPA money, there will certainly be a need. Our typical allocation for rental assistance in a given year is about $50,000. We spend $50,000 a week on rental assistance since the pandemic. So the status quo, what we used to do, the quote unquote new normal is different. So I think there is a need for additional funds if the state doesn't figure out a way to continue to fund the programs that they have for another year or so at minimum to get through the pandemic. And we would be fully supportive of UIA's proposals. But if the state does go back to the well and come out with $100 million to spread around the state or something like that, that would sort of obviate the need for the city to step in.
Yeah, I know the mayor has said that he doesn't, if there is state money available, he doesn't want to duplicate it, but if I'm hearing that the emergency relief money is running out and the problem is still there, then maybe we do need a line item. Our friend Carl Alves over at PACA has asked a question about scaling up programs. I think, Josh, you touched on that with the PACE program. I wonder if any of you can speak a little more to that. My frustration is sometimes I see these various programs and I just wonder, well, it's, that development has 6 affordable units. They did a handful of first-time home buyers, but how do we get these programs up to scale? How do we get real numbers? Because this is a citywide problem.
I think, I'm just gonna put my opinion in. I think we need to utilize the programs that we have instead of creating new ones. And I think that's where a lot of the bubbles are, if you will. We have PACA, we have PACE, we have, the South Coast Fair Housing Group Department. We have a lot of entities right here that can utilize those monies to build up and to add on to the empty schools that are empty, the empty churches. There's so many empty buildings. If you look at the Shaw's Plaza on Kings Highway, that whole plaza is like a waste of space and time, and somebody owns that, but there's nothing being done with it. You could have businesses in there, you could have a day shelter, you could have a day center there, you can have day centers throughout the community, not just in one area, but there's a lot that can be done. Just utilize the programs that exist here, because like you said, Mr. Spillane, that we have a lot of programs, we have a lot of resources. It's just a matter of making sure that those resources get what they need in order to build out, in order to make things happen. Because I, for one, am tired of talking about the problem. I say this all the time. I'm tired of talking about the problem and we're not doing anything about it. And I think the elephant in the room right now is the fact that the ARPA money has not even been accepted. So we're talking about money that we don't even have yet. So just so I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, for those of you who may not know, the Mayor John Mitchell and the City Council are still debating over when to accept it or who accepts it and how much money should go to various programs, housing and various other programs. Josh, I think at one point in the materials you sent me, you mentioned that if you had $1 million, you could do 50 units in 2 years. That's kind of going to scale a little bit, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think to Carl's point, right? If the problem is we're 2,000 affordable units short as a community, 50 sounds good, and it costs $1 million, which is a big eye-popping number to a lot of us, and it would certainly entail a lot of work on our end. But it only scratches the surface of solving the problem, and maybe there's another 200 or so affordable housing projects in the city or affordable housing units under development, and those might take between a year to 5 years to come to fruition. We're talking about like the Union Street projects that we see. But again, that's still, I don't know, 10% of where we need to be probably as a community. I think solving this problem of scalability does involve some sort of outside the box solutions. And one of the beauties of sort of what we propose to do is that it's a revenue generating model, right? The rents, instead of going into a landlord's pocket, go back into providing services or providing additional units. So I think you need other players in the game to see things and try to consider things that way. And more importantly than any one proposal or any one agency, the only way to scale any solutions here that work is to have the political will to solve this problem and to take this problem on and discuss it and figure out ways for New Bedford to rise to the challenge. And we've done that with so many other issues in the last decade or so. We have to own this one too. I think we owe it to the people of the city to do that. But until then, developers are sort of reluctant to spend their time here because they're not perfectly clear that this is a community that embraces what they propose to do. And others like Renee just said, you know, we're tired of talking about the same problems, right? We've been talking about these problems for 3 or 4 years, and now they're coming to a boiling point and a tipping point. So we're here tonight talking about them because we've got this one-time funding opportunity. But we would have said the same things to you 3 or 4 years ago. And we'll continue to say them until there's a solution to the problem. But I think it starts with owning it and acknowledging it, and then bringing voices to the table like this tonight to talk about those solutions. So, thank you.
David, Tony Sapienza has written in that he wants to caution us not to conflate the problem of homelessness and the housing that's needed for the homeless with the problem of low income or working people who no longer can afford the rents. And I think we all understand that they're 2 separate problems, but they are 2 housing problems. And so that's why we're discussing them. Can you address that issue of the distinction?
So actually, that's why I started to raise my hand, because Josh started saying we need more people at the table and different people. And I saw Mr. Sapienza's comment, and I would love to talk to exactly what he's saying, because I think one of the groups of people that are not at the table are the business people, are the owners of the factories, are the managers, the presidents of these groups. They do attend to the Workforce Investment Board, but that's only a portion of it. Getting people trained to be able to do things in the workforce, which we need, but we got to be able to pay living wages, which has changed dramatically. Tony is making a good comment that you don't want to conflate. But I would challenge them to come to the Homeless Service Providers Network meetings, which are open to the public, to go to the shelters, not only the Sister Roses of the world, but to some of the family shelters, and to go talk to some of the folks that are struggling in the food lines, where they're having to pick up food at the different places where they're being offered free, so that they can help pay with their other bills. We do need different solutions. And I'm going to tell you, sometimes, as we've been referred to, us bleeding hearts, may be a little bit too emotional in this. Maybe we need some business people, somebody like a Tony that steps up and says, okay, how can we look at this? Because we do need to look at different solutions. Some of the things that he mentions, is correct. we must find ways to use tax credits and other subsidies to build more. But to Joshua's point, it's not just about building more. It's about even using what we have to renovate and make it something that people can use. But I do want to point out that one of the statements that's being made is that, as stated, and I want to use the words so I don't misstate. Remember, there's a fundamental disconnect between construction costs and new apartments and what New Bedford residents can afford to pay. And that statement alone, to me, is the problem. Because if a New Bedford resident can't afford to pay what's being built, it's because we're building things not for New Bedford residents. We're building things for people that are coming from other places. And that's great for a tax base. That's great, and it looks good, to be able to make us the city on the hill. But that's because we're pushing other people that have been here for generations out the back door.
Yeah.
Mr.
And
Spillane.
I think that the Regeneration Committee and other business groups have stepped up to the table, but sometimes in the way that the city works, it's hard to get all those voices in the same room at the same time. And the issue of New Bedford building out its economy is always one, for the last 20, 30, 40 years that we've known that we've had to do in New Bedford. We're starting to run out of time. And I want to get back to Renee's observation about this as a political matter, that the city council has not even accepted the money that the mayor and the city council are debating. Sometimes you hear that they're getting close, but they haven't gotten there yet. And there really hasn't been that much talk about housing in the discussions. Anybody have any observations to make about that?
Can I just piggyback a little bit on what Reverend Lima just said in response to what you just spoke about, Mr. Spillane, as well.
Jack.
We have to remember that, homeless people, regardless of why they're homeless, how they're homeless, regardless of income or no income, homeless people are homeless people. And we are in the direct service field, so we're more on the ground. So we're able to see and understand and empathize. We still have to treat people with human dignity, regardless of why they're homeless or how they became homeless or when they became homeless. Homeless people are traumatized people who have been affected by the economy, have been affected by the political actions that have been taken in our state or in our city. And as far as the ARPA funds being accepted, I understand that the mayor and the city council are in conversation, and there's this tennis game going back and forth, and I get it. But what's at stake here are people's lives. We're talking about people's lives. We're talking about treating people with human dignity. And those same people, when they get on their feet and become stable and start making money, those same people go into those stores that those business owners own, go into those places and purchase things. So do we want an economy that's growing with people that are contributing to it? Or do we want to just keep pointing our fingers and judging people and treating them less than because they're not sitting in a house doing the Zoom call? I mean, I think that a lot of the comments are great comments and they're constructive, but at the same time, I just wish people would look deep inside themselves and figure out, what if it was you or your family members? How would you feel?
I do think that there is a tendency with all these issues, social issues, to think of there's us and them, and that's not my problem. My life is together, and that's somebody else's problem. And I think that that's a real problem, that we don't think of ourselves as one city working together. We think of it as that's somebody else's problems, and we don't think of it as there, but for the grace of God go I, and I could lose my job too. I'll just put David and Josh on the spot a little bit. What about the political issue? Is there something that could make this come to a landing better?
I could jump in just to start and get at the past question, right? Of the city council accepting the ARPA funds and kind of getting that process moving. I think of course we support accepting the money, right? It's obviously a one-time opportunity. I know. And I think Councilor Burgo made some great points at the City Council Finance meeting last week, and I respect any councilor that raises the issues that we're talking about here tonight as a way to gain traction and gain support for the causes that we're talking about, because they should be prioritized and they need to be part of the plan. And I respect the fact that the council has limited ability to negotiate, right? So making this process transparent and moving it along so that all these sides can be heard and issues can be debated in the council chambers is important. At the same time, we know we want the money to be accepted. We want it to go out on the street and be put to practice by agencies like us and agencies like Renee's and Reverend Lima's as well. So I think just the process alone has raised some of the awareness of this topic, because we might not be here tonight talking about it otherwise. So that in and of itself is good, and I think needs to be a point from which we grow, right? Every campaign in the city should have this as a focal point until the problem is solved. And I think, like you said, Jack, we're all a little too content sometimes to just ignore the problems that don't affect us. There are, side streets behind Sid Wainer that are populated full. Like it looks like Union Street in the middle of the day, and it's people sleeping in the car. And that's a real silent part of the homeless population that doesn't get talked about enough, because when we think homeless, we think people in the alcove, we think people in the alley downtown. But the reality is these are working people. They're people that you come across every day in the course of ordinary business. They're the people that serve your coffee at the drive-thru. They're the people that you see at the movie theater. They might be relatives of yours. They don't go around talking about it. They go to the gym and they shower there, and they're just waiting to find a place to live or save up a little bit or get their tax refund so that they can take that and have a first-class security. It's a problem for ordinary people. And Reverend Lima is right to point out that it's a business community concern too, because these are your employees. These are the people that you need to operate your business and be successful as well. So we all have a role to play in the problem, whether that's political or from the business world or from the community sector, like we are all here today. And some of it's just people at home that don't have a dog in the fight. That just they're New Bedford citizens and they want what's best for their neighbors. So we need to be mindful of that and engage everybody in the conversation.
I had never heard that about the side streets near Sid Wainer's. You're gonna have to take me up there. People sleeping in cars. I'd like to know more about that. I want to check in with David for a second and Renee before we close. We could go another hour on this topic. It's just so fascinating and there's so much to talk about. I've really enjoyed this. Jeannie Costa has been writing in, and I don't think we have much time to cover, but she raises the issue of NIMBY, and we tend to get a lot of these developments addressing affordable housing in the downtown and not spread out through the city, never mind the suburbs. And I think that's an issue that's worth raising maybe the next time we talk about. David, why don't we go to you for some closing remarks?
Well, the NIMBY suggests to say that until a state makes towns and cities, requires them to actually get something done, not just leave them open for development like a 40B housing type situation, but actually starts making everybody share the load, it's not going to happen. That is one of the difficulties. And so cities like New Bedford and others do end up taking more of their share. But that being said, there are things that can be done. And I do not challenge as much as welcome, invite all leaders, business leaders that have more acumen than I do for sure, and many others, people that have to recognize that in order to get good employees into your building, it's not just educated, it's not just a decent pay, it's not just benefits, it's them being able to afford to live near where they work. And so we need everybody to the table. And I'm just going to end my comment with what I started. If you took all the ARPA money, you still would not be able to solve the problem. And I do want stuff going to the arts and culture. When I went to that Ray Charles show, I was sitting up front. This body does not fit in those seats, and they're hard and they're metal. And, I want to see that. This is our city. I've lived in this city my whole life. But we do have to prioritize, and the things that we can't use everything for, we need to plan better. And we need political will to be able to say, yes, let's make a solution and let's get it started.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. The arts and tourism is another important part of our economy that deserves a share of the money. Renee, do you have some closing remarks you want to make?
I just want to echo that, we're not saying take away from any of these other strategic management, arts and tourism, because all those things show us who we are as a city. I mean, we are a city made of culture and different walks of life. And those things are important, but what we are saying is housing needs to be made a priority, and we won't solve the problem with $20 million or $21 million, but we can start. That's a start to part of the solution, instead of just continuing to talk about the problem.
Yep. Josh, some quick closing remarks?
Yeah, real quick. I think really great topic, and I've enjoyed the discussion quite a bit. Just to make this real for an additional class or an additional group of people, right? There are probably some viewers right now that are thinking about their college-age children that intend to move back to the city once they finish up at school. And those are the folks who might start in the workforce making $35,000 or $40,000 in an entry-level job, and they won't be able to afford to live on their own. So they're going to be living in your house. And now imagine what that's like for someone without a college education, or someone that has other barriers, or maybe has some children to take care of at the same time, and childcare costs and all those things. So it's real. It's across income classes and sectors and everything, and that needs to be thought about. My last comment today would be, we put a video out on Facebook, on the PACE Facebook today, that sort of explains this problem in depth and sort of our solution to it, or our part of a solution toward the problem. And in the spirit of having these discussions and keeping these conversations going, I would say anyone who's watching this who has a different take on this, or thinks that there's a way to strengthen our idea or our thought on this, and you want to reach out, I'm happy to have those conversations, and I would really encourage having those conversations. So I'm a pretty easy guy to find. Get in touch with me, and let's talk about it, because I think these are problems that no one organization, no 3 organizations, no 4 organizations can solve in a vacuum. We need it to be a whole community response, and to the extent that I can help facilitate that, I want to do my role in it, and I think everybody in the community has a duty to.
Amen.
Renee, David, and Josh, thanks so much for taking part in this forum. I just enjoyed it immensely. Andy, wrap it up.
Okay. How do you put a period or an exclamation point on this conversation? It was just so important, and it was a great conversation, great exchange of constructive ideas, and I do want to thank our panelists for joining us. It's only a Wednesday night, it's not a Friday night, but you still took time out to get your message across to everybody out there. And that's terrific. And thanks, Jack, for your even-handed work in moderating this debate. And especially thanks to everybody who joined us and sent in comments and questions. We'll continue with further conversations as we come up with issues, and maybe we'll revisit this issue in a different way again. So if you didn't catch the entire conversation, if you joined halfway through, you should know that we will be posting a video of this on our website, and you'll be able to access that tomorrow morning. So anyway, just thank you very much. And it was a terrific night, and it's a great job. So
Thank you.
Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you, everyone. Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
God bless.